In this episode, I'm going to share about an experience that I had this week with a mother and her teenage son. I got a text earlier in the week and it said, Jason, can you call us right now? We are in a crisis, basically. And I was in the middle of putting my twins to bed. And so typically I will, point people to the emergency room or call 911 if there's a crisis or something that's above my level of care that I typically treat at Brick House. But as I was putting my twins to bed, I kept feeling this nudge that although I didn't have any information, I needed to take action. And so I responded and said, yeah, can we chat right after I put the twins to bed? If it's an emergency, take them straight to the emergency room. And she said, no, we can wait. So this episode is about the conversation that we had when she discovered that her son was having a drug-induced psychotic experience with heightened anxiety. And she wanted to know what to do while he was in that space. So this episode is about that conversation that we had and subsequent conversations that we had and 3 ways that we turned this nightmare into a springboard.
Welcome to the Get Unhooked podcast with Jason Coombs, where experience meets insight. Jason Coombs, nationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Brick House Recovery, shares hard-earned lessons on resilience, leadership, addiction, and mental health. No filters, no fluff, just real stories, practical wisdom, and a deeper look at what it takes to grow, lead, and keep moving forward. Now here's your host, Jason Coombs.
Welcome to episode number 5. Episode number 5. It's crazy. By the way, I'm loving this. I'm loving this outlet to, I think about topics all week long that I can, that I can bring and create a show about or a little episode about. I think this one's going to be a little bit more meaty. I'm going to try to get more of the episodes that are a little bit smaller, shorter, so that y'all can listen to them on your way to work, or if you're just unloading the dishwasher, because sometimes I appreciate short podcast episodes myself. For this, I think it deserves some attention. So let me pick up where I left off in the intro. After I got this text from this concerned mother, friend of ours, about her son, he appeared to be in a drug-induced psychosis. And here's the thing. It had extended more than 5 days. And so she called me or reached out to me on day 5 of him in this state. She stated he was having audible and visual hallucinations, sudden mood swings, and panic attacks. As we got a little further in the conversation, she shared that he had admitted to taking some psychedelic mushrooms. The active drug in psychedelic mushrooms are psilocybin. And that's spelled with a P, psilocybin. Later, in a subsequent conversation, he admitted to a THC dependency, that he might have vaped while on some of the mushrooms. And so it was interesting because, as I looked into it a little bit more, asked some questions, we had, lengthy conversations. He finally admitted that it was wax administered through a vape pen or cartridge. So I'm going to give you a little education on what the state of the union is in terms of the cannabis world, specifically as it relates to what your youth, if you have teenagers, are up against. And I think it's just helpful information to know some of the names of the concentrates for cannabis that are out there now. We didn't have all of this when I was using, and so I'm a student along with you guys. And so hopefully my research and lived experience will intertwine and weave into helping you guys go to the top of the learning curve. So some of the names for the cannabis concentrates are wax, dabs or dabbing, shatter, butter with 2 Ds, or batter with 2 Ds, crumble, live resin. Live resin is a type of resin that they extract after they freeze the marijuana or cannabis plant, and they pull the resin right from the plant itself after it's been frozen. They go through a whole process there, supposed to make it super potent. Another name is honeycomb, oil, BHO, or butane hash oil, pull and snap, sugar, sauce, diamonds, and rosin. So the administration methods of this type of condensed or concentrated cannabis are dabbing, which is the using a dab rig, which is like a specialized water pipe with a heating element. Vape pens or cartridges, in this case, that's the way he administered it. These are pre-filled cartridges or refillable pens. Nectar collectors. Now, this one I had to look up. It's like, what's a nectar collector? This is a portable device used to directly touch the concentrate. And so imagine like a little, a glass pipe with a metal tip, and they heat up the tip with a torch or a lighter, and then they touch it to the flower, and that's where they inhale it and breathe in the nectar, which is super heightened, potent concentrate. The edibles, concentrates that are incorporated into food products, like gummies. That's been around a while, though. They used to call them space cake or pot brownies, but now there's all sorts of edibles. So they've just expanded and they made them way, way more concentrated. This one I had to look up. It's tinctures. So tink, T-I-N-C, chures, T-U-R-E-S. Now, tinctures is a liquid extract placed under the tongue or added to beverages. So that one was new to me. Topicals. Now, this is typically applied to the skin, but generally doesn't have the psychoactive effects. Infused joints or blunts. So, think of your standard joint or blunt, and this would be adding concentrates to the traditional flower and making it much more potent. So here's the danger and the potential side effects is that the potency concerns are that these concentrates are significantly higher THC content, up to 60 to 90% stronger compared to the traditional cannabis flower, which is 15 to 25% THC. So significantly higher. Rapid delivery of high doses can lead to stronger and more immediate and intense effects. Increased risk of tolerance and development of dependence, greater potential for overconsumption due to concentrated nature. Now, I think these are some of the physical side effects that this friend of mine was going through. Not all of them, but some of them, the physical and the psychological side effects that can come from concentrated cannabis. The physical side effects can be the rapid heart rate, increased blood pressure, impaired coordination and motor skills, respiratory issues when smoked or vaporized, nausea, vomiting, particularly when there's overconsumption, chest pain, and headaches. Now, the psychological side effects, I think, are super interesting because he hit almost every one of these while she was describing him and when I talked to him. Acute anxiety and panic attacks, paranoia, hallucinations with high doses, memory impairment, potential trigger for psychosis in vulnerable individuals, risk of cannabis use disorder, and potential impacts on developing brains in youth. So I think this is really important to bring to all of our attention once again, because the drug game is changing all the time. And it's very interesting as I was talking to this beautiful individual. I should give him a name. Let's give him a pseudonym of Troy. We'll just say Troy. That sounds good. So this teenager, Troy, was holding back some of the information. At least that's what I thought. But now looking closer at it, the more information that we gathered, it could have been this memory impairment. And what he experienced was a trigger for psychosis in a vulnerable individual. So that's the meat right there in terms of, from my perspective. When he finally admitted that it was wax, it kind of brought it all home for me, because it wasn't so much the mushrooms, although they could have been laced with something. It was the additional cannabis on top of the psilocybin that caused this psychotic break or drug-induced psychosis. Now, I want to speak to the reasons he opened up to me was a significant approach that I speak a lot about in conferences and from the stage, and when I do personal coaching and consulting with families or corporations. Now, I'm just going to go to some of the ways that I was able to build trust and rapport, and that was through taking the time to ask questions that were non-judgmental. I used a tactic that normalized it, that didn't make him feel like he was the only one on the planet who was going through this, but that, this is common, happens all the time, don't worry, because he was having consistent panic attacks. And through that, I built up some trust and rapport. So I want to just speak to trust versus rapport and the importance to have both, not just trust. So on page 136 of my book, I speak about and talk about the differences, but I'll just give you a brief clip from that. So trust, before you can influence someone, you must develop a genuine level of trust. Trust is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, and strength in someone. Now, rapport is a little bit different. Rapport, I'm going to read from page 137. Rapport is a little bit different than trust. Rapport is a close and harmonious relationship in which you understand each other's feelings and ideas. After a period of time, I experienced this with my parents as they and I grew emotionally healthier. Our communication became open and receptive to the point where I felt like I could share my innermost feelings with them, and they shared theirs with me. You can begin to develop this rapport today. The most effective way to build rapport quickly is when two people feel that there is safety, trust, love, and that it exists between them. Begin by focusing on your addicted loved one's needs, feelings, and thoughts. In other words, don't make it about what you need, want, or expect from them. Turn it around and focus on his or her needs, wants, and what suffering he or she might be going through. You may need to bite your tongue and restrain yourself from correcting them or reacting to sick thinking and behaviors. Just try it and do the best you can. This is a practice that takes time to develop. The goal of this approach is not to prove who is right and who is wrong, but rather to foster a loving, respectful, and collaborative dialogue about change over time. And that's the key, is over time. He didn't immediately get honest with his parents, and he didn't immediately get fully honest with me. But over time, more came out, because this is the long game approach and the most effective approach. I like to say that recovery, fast is slow and slow is fast. So as you take things slow, your progress is much faster than if you try to rush it and you run faster than you have strength, or if you're trying to force a relationship and try to force trust and rapport, it ends up taking a lot longer to build genuine trust and rapport. So back to the top of 138. It honors your loved one's struggle, timeline, resistance, and confusion, or basically his ambivalence. It promotes independence and self-determination. It can also be used to improve your relationships with your other children, spouse, friends, and coworkers. Yes, it is that powerful and applies to all of your relationships. So there's a little clip from a nugget from Unhooked, my book, Unhooked, How to Help an Addicted Loved One Recover. And because we took this approach, we were able to truly connect. And that set us up for this opportunity to offer 3 ways that he could turn this into a springboard in his life. And so this is where the 3 ways we turned this nightmare into a springboard. Number 1, what we focus on expands. Underlying the drug use, first it was all about what did he take, what was in it. The mentality was, if we can just get him through the high and the effects, he'll go back to being normal. And we got to make sure that we avoid the drugs, avoid the people that he was using with. And although that's important, what's more important in thinking about the long game is, what was it inside him that broke when he inhaled all of this THC and psilocybin, when he ate the psilocybin or the magic mushrooms. So that is the underlying issue. My assumption, and I am not a clinician, and I did not diagnose him, and I let him know I'm not a clinician. I said, I'm not going to diagnose you, but I recommend seeing a professional about this, because what I believe happened is similar to something that I experienced, which is I had untreated anxiety disorder. And there were times where I used psilocybin and THC at the same time, and I had similar reactions, and they lasted a longer time than they should. And I had increased panic attacks, increased acute anxiety, paranoia. Like I used to say, man, these just turned on me. Like they used to be fun, and all of a sudden it turned on me. Well, yeah, something broke in my brain. And so focusing on the root of the problem, not the drugs, because the drugs are a symptom. So that's number one, is what we focus on expands. And the important thing to focus on is what's underneath that broke, that needs to be treated. Because it's not enough just to stop using and to avoid the friends, but what's the path to treat his anxiety disorder? What's the path to treat the possible bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder? Or it could be a number of things. And I'm not speaking specifically about him. I don't believe he has those other diagnoses, but I do believe that he's got anxiety, because it was very clear based on the information that they were giving. So that's number one, is don't just focus on the drugs, focus on what's under there that needs to be treated and the long game. Number two is, now that we know there is something under there, I told him that he will never be able to go back to the way it was when he used. Like he after experiencing this and having that reaction in the brain, he needs to embrace the reality that if he uses again, he's vulnerable to trigger psychosis again. And combined with this acute anxiety, panic attacks and paranoia and memory impairment and hallucinations. And the key is that it's time now to close that chapter and never look back. So that's number two. Close that chapter, never look back, because the risks are too great. You can't go back to using like a normal person. That is such a thing. Third, number three, begin to view the anxiety as a superpower. Now, I share often about this, that I am grateful for my anxiety disorder. However, anxiety disorder is a curse and a superpower. It's a curse and a blessing. Let me give one example that I gave to him. I shared it with him. I said, look, I don't want you to feel discouraged that you've got this anxiety disorder, which I think you do. Go get it verified by a psych provider, a professional in that realm. But my experience with anxiety disorder led me to discover habits and actions that I could take on a daily basis in the morning to bring that cortisol down. And for example, my anxiety disorder led me to compulsive overeating once I got sober in 2009. I gained 90 pounds in 5 months. Believe it or not, I wish I had the picture available right now to show, but I blew up and was about 275 pounds. And that was my outlet for anxiety. So every time I was anxious, I would eat, and I'd get that release of dopamine, sugar, flour, those kinds of things. Those food products, they give a hit. And that was what I chased until I was just so overweight that I could barely bend over and tie my shoes. In fact, I couldn't. I had to lift my feet up on something to tie my shoes because there was so much skin and flesh in the way in my midsection. Now, what I learned was that if I could get up in the morning and move my body, not to lose the weight, but just to get my heart rate up for at least 10 minutes each day, that my cortisol would lower and I would start to feel more hopeful. I started to feel more motivated and ambitious. I began to include prayer and meditation in my movements. So if I would go on a run, once I was able to run, I included prayer and meditation, and I would get this inspiration, this conscious contact, as we talk about in recovery in step 11, and new ideas would come, topics that I could weave into my speeches, or people that I needed to reach out to, or mentors that I needed to connect with and build relationships with. And all of that happened in the action of moving my body. That led to wanting to eat healthier. And that also lowered my anxiety. And I started to see results physically. I ultimately shed about 60 pounds. That wasn't the reason. The reason that I was doing it was because I knew that if I didn't treat my anxiety, that life is just more difficult. And then I would self-medicate, whether it be drugs, alcohol, food, work. Some people compulsive and obsess about, they call it exercise bulimia, which is an unhealthy form of exercise where you eat a lot and then you go and work out for 3 hours to try to work it off. It's like purging through exercise. And I experienced some of that too, but I ultimately began to learn to incorporate these habits in my daily life. And once I set a goal to run a triathlon, and then that led to setting a goal to completing an Ironman. And I have since completed 2 70.3 Ironman races. And what I shared with him is that it was my anxiety disorder that was the spark that motivated me to take small actions that developed into habits to treat the anxiety. And while treating the anxiety, I became productive. My self-efficacy increased, or my confidence in myself, and my mental resilience was building up. My self-love, my self-image, my self-condemnation started to melt away. I just began to treat myself with more compassion and more love through this process. And I found so much joy from this new lifestyle that I've been living. And it's a big, big part of my happiness and my joy. So I go back to, had I not had anxiety disorder, would I have been as motivated to develop these daily habits that have resulted in a variety of blessings that have rippled out into other blessings and so forth, and into other areas of my life? I don't think I would have. I think that the anxiety has been my gift, my superpower. It helped me slow down and spend time in meditation where maybe I wouldn't have before. I have ADHD, and so meditation is very difficult for me. But with the habit of slowing down, doing breath work, sometimes a cold plunge, to lower that cortisol and increase my dopamine and increase my epinephrine, that process has helped me in so many ways beyond just lowering the anxiety. So viewing it as a superpower. So those are the 3 ways we turned this nightmare into a springboard. Number 1, we stopped focusing on the drugs and we began to focus on the underlying issue, and what we focus on expands. Number 2, never go back. It's time to close that chapter of his life and never look back, because you can't go back to using like you used to. It's never going to be the same. Something has happened in your brain and it's not worth the risk. Number 3 is changing the perspective that this anxiety is a superpower. And thank goodness, I should add gratitude being the number 4, is thank goodness at his age, he's becoming aware of this. I didn't become aware of this stuff inside me until I was like 31, where it all like made sense to me. Before, that, I was just constantly self-medicating through actions, risky behaviors, through substances, through food, through relationships, you name it. So those are the three ways that I suggest turning this nightmare into a springboard if you have a teenager. I also recommend diving into the principles in Unhooked, specifically that chapter of the shift that I read from earlier in this episode, because it's in that chapter that you begin to learn the skills and techniques that are evidence-based that therapists use all around the world to influence others. And you can learn those too. So I hope this episode was helpful. Would love to hear from you via Instagram or social media, so that I can know what other topics you would like me to address. I'm super, super open to looking into and researching anything that might help you and help your addicted loved one. And my hope is that this podcast will help you level up. Thank you for joining me today. I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this show. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing these episodes so that they can help others. This is one way that you can give back and pay it forward, is by just passing along this free information to others that are possibly in need. Share it on social media, share it with your loved ones and family members. And don't forget, you can access my book on Audible, as well as on Amazon or on my website, as well as you can find information about our services at Brickhouse Recovery at brickhouserecovery.com.